December Monday morning. A 17-year-old girl left her home to get a cup of coffee and was reported missing. A few days later, her body was discovered, clutching a dried red rose. The case initially received minimal attention, with only 3 officers assigned to investigate. As days turned into weeks, more teenage girls began to vanish, each last seen walking home late at night. Their bodies were eventually found, strangled with their own clothing. The community of Green Hill, nestled in a mountainous area with vast fields and dense forests, was gripped by fear. One of the latest victims, a 14-year-old student, was found in her bed, having been assaulted and strangled with her own clothes. The police launched a thorough search for clues. Investigator Grace arrived at the scene, where her assistant eagerly approached her. "What have you found?" Grace inquired. "The pattern matches the previous cases. The killer is the same," her assistant replied. "This time, however, the victim was killed indoors, not outside." "How can you tell?" Grace asked. Her assistant presented a dried red rose. "The killer left this at the scene, just like with the other victims." "The killer is becoming more audacious, entering a victim's home," Grace observed. "We still lack concrete evidence to connect anyone to these crimes." She then instructed her assistant, "Check all the flower shops to see who has been purchasing red roses." As Grace was giving instructions, a police officer approached. "Officer Grace, the chief wants to see you at the department immediately." In the chief's office, the mood was tense. "Come in, Grace," the chief said, his frustration evident. "There's a serial killer on the loose, and you haven't caught him yet." With limited bus routes, many residents walked home alone in the evenings. The growing fear among the populace was palpable as they rushed to get home before dark. The predator was out there, and everyone was on edge. "The Home Office has given us 2 weeks to resolve this." "Finding him within 2 weeks is not realistic," Grace replied. Just as Grace was about to respond, the door swung open. "Chief, we've arrested a suspect." Grace was taken aback. "How did this happen?" "The suspect has been buying red roses from various flower shops for the past 2 months," the officer explained. "Good work," the chief said, acknowledging the progress. "But buying red roses isn't proof of guilt. Anyone could buy them," Grace countered. "He's a high school teacher who has been purchasing roses daily since November. We need more evidence to justify an arrest," the officer said. "Investigate him further. We only have 2 weeks," the chief instructed. "Understood, Chief." The suspect, impeccably dressed, sat in the interrogation room awaiting questioning. Grace entered, introduced herself, and began her interrogation. "Have you ever been convicted of a crime before?" "No." "What is your motive for these crimes?" "I am innocent and have not committed any crimes." "Where were you yesterday at 6 a.m.? "At home." "Do you have an alibi?" "No." "Are you currently in a relationship?" "No." "Can you explain why you buy red roses every day?" The teacher answered all questions except the one about the roses. Each time Grace asked, he refused to answer. After a moment of deliberation, Grace decided, "You are free to go." The man left with a smile. The chief, observing from behind the glass, entered the interrogation room. "Why did you let him go?" "We don't have enough evidence to keep him in custody. The killer is a clever psychopath, making it challenging to gather solid evidence," Grace explained. Wednesday, 4:30 p.m. The weather was growing darker. A man, impeccably dressed, loitered near a flower shop, occasionally glancing at passers-by. A teenage girl walked by. The man approached her politely. "Hello, I have a date today and don't know what flowers women like. Can you help me?" The girl, intrigued, replied, "It's better to buy a white rose." "Can you choose one for me?" the man asked. She agreed, and they went into the store. The girl selected a white rose, while the man chose a red one. After they left the shop, the man offered her a ride. "The weather is getting cold and dark. I can drive you home," he said. The girl accepted the offer and got into the car. Soon, she noticed that the passenger side door had no handle and couldn't be opened. Alarmed, she asked the man to stop the car, but he ignored her. Gathering her courage, she used her heel to hit the man on the head. He lost control of the car, which crashed into the motorway fence. She managed to escape unharmed. A girl, her face pale with fear and her breath coming in ragged gasps, burst into the police department, her voice trembling as she cried out, "Please help me! He wanted to kill me!" The sudden commotion drew the attention of several police officers who quickly gathered around her. With visible distress, she began to recount the harrowing details of the encounter, her words spilling out in a rush as she tried to convey the urgency of her situation and the terror she had just escaped. Panicked, the girl ran into the police station, shouting, "Help me! He tried to kill me!" Officers quickly gathered around her as she recounted the incident. The operation to apprehend the suspect was meticulously planned and executed with precision. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the neighborhood, a team of uniformed officers and plainclothes detectives surrounded the residence where the killer was believed to be hiding. The air was thick with tension as officers, equipped with tactical gear and radios, moved stealthily towards the house. The lead detective, a seasoned veteran with a sharp gaze, signaled for the team to take their positions. With a deep breath, he knocked firmly on the door, his voice steady and authoritative as he announced, "Police, open up!" Inside, the suspect, a disheveled figure with a look of panic, was startled by the commotion. The sound of heavy footsteps and urgent voices grew louder, heightening the sense of impending confrontation. Realizing escape was no longer an option, the suspect hesitated, then slowly opened the door, revealing a face etched with fear and defiance. The officers moved swiftly but carefully, their movements synchronized as they entered the house. The lead detective stepped forward, holding up a badge and issuing commands with a commanding presence. "You're under arrest for the murder of innocent teenage girls. Put your hands where we can see them and get on the ground." The suspect, cornered and resigned, complied with the instructions. With hands raised in surrender, he dropped to his knees, his breathing ragged. The officers moved in quickly, securing him with handcuffs and reading him his rights. As they led him out of the house, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of relief and grim determination. The community, still reeling from the recent events, would finally see justice served. The arresting officers conducted a final sweep of the premises, ensuring that there were no further threats, and collected evidence for the ongoing investigation. The suspect was escorted to a waiting police vehicle, his expression a mixture of resignation and anger, as the door closed behind him, marking the end of a tense and dangerous pursuit. The killer was sitting alone in the interrogation room. The chief, who had been observing, said, "Jay Leonard. He was the suspect in a previous case, but we didn't have enough evidence to charge him." He turned to Grace and said, "Now it's your turn." Grace approached the interrogation room door with a purposeful stride, her mind replaying the details of the investigation. The chief turned to her with a probing look. "How did you determine the teacher was innocent?" he asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and authority. Grace took a moment to gather her thoughts before responding. "At first I was suspicious," she began, her voice steady but thoughtful. The teacher seemed to fit the profile of the suspect, and his behavior was definitely worth investigating. However, as I dug deeper into his background, something didn't add up. I decided to follow him discreetly, hoping to find a lead. She continued, her gaze focused on the chief. What I discovered was quite revealing. Every day, without fail, he would visit a local florist and buy a bouquet of red roses. It was a peculiar habit, so I decided to trace his route and see where he was taking them. My investigation led me to a small, serene cemetery on the outskirts of town. Grace paused, her expression reflecting the gravity of her findings. It turns out the teacher was placing those roses on his fiancée's grave. She had passed away 2 months ago, and he had been honoring her memory daily. This gesture of love and mourning was a clear indication of his innocence. He had no connection to the crimes we were investigating. The chief nodded, absorbing the information. So, the roses were a crucial piece of evidence that helped clear him? Grace nodded in return, her expression resolute. Exactly. It was a poignant reminder that sometimes understanding the full context of a person's actions can reveal the truth we're looking for. The teacher was not the killer. He was simply a grieving man keeping a promise to the woman he loved. With that, Grace turned her attention back to the task at hand, the weight of the revelation settling into a deeper understanding of the case and its complexities.